I never went to believe these things. I always thought these stories of cursed objects and strange presences were just exaggerations. People suggestible, watching horror movie at night, and then listening to noises that do not exist. I was like this skeptical until that weekend in Charleston. Now, I confess that sometimes when I'm alone at night, I find myself thinking, it was supposed to be a common tour. I was visiting the city at work and enjoyed the free Saturday to explore the historic center. It was hot, but the wind that came from the river relieved a little. The cobblestone streets and old buildings gave me that delicious feeling of turning in time. I entered one of those antique stores, more out of curiosity than anything else. The place had a strong smell of old wood and worn leather. The air was still hot, and every step I took made the Ranger floor. Inside, everything seemed to have been forgotten. There were furniture with time marks, dusty mirrors, books with worn covers. But it was at the bottom of the store I saw the doll. She was kind of hidden on a low shelf, next to a broken watch and a music box that no longer played. Small, delicate, in a light blue dress that had already lost color. The porcelain was slightly cracked at some points, but the eyes, it was the eyes that drew attention. They were painted in a way that bothered me. They seemed to follow me when I moved. I felt a brief shiver, but I shook my head and laughed alone. My bullshit. I approached and touched her. Cold, very cold, despite the heat of the store. I passed my finger over the doll's face and felt the thin cracks in the porcelain, as if she had smiled and time had been in charge of cracking that smile. At that moment, I felt a presence. I can't explain. Do you know what looks like someone is looking at you in the back? I turned fast, but I only saw the owner of the store, a thin gentleman with crooked glasses, watching me silently from the counter. Beautiful, isn't it? His voice made me startle. I thought I was alone. Yet yes, very peculiar. She's very old. They brought from a house here in the region. Old house. It's been a long time. No one else wanted to be with her. He smiled, but there was something strange in that smile. Forced, maybe? Or was I already creating things in my head? I don't know. I only know that for some reason it made me hesitate. For a moment, I thought to leave the doll there and leave. But I held firmly and convinced myself that it was just an object, just a doll. How much does it cost? He looked at me for a while. It seemed too long. Then it gave a price. It wasn't even expensive. Maybe he just wanted to get rid of her. While he packaged, I tried to pull subject. In this house, you said, was there anything special about her? He stopped for a second, and his eyes changed, as if I had asked something I shouldn't. He cleared his throat and said evasive, just an old house. Nobody lives there anymore. Better to let it go. I was curious, but the tone he used made me understand that it was better not to insist. I left the store with the doll wrapped in an old newspaper. The sun outside looked hotter than before, but I still felt a light cold in the back of the neck. I walked to the car, but before I got in, I felt a strange impulse. I opened the package and looked at the doll again. Daylight revealed details that I had not noticed inside. There were blemishes in the dress, dark spots, half brown. I tried to convince myself that it was just rust or dirt time, but I don't know. It caused me restlessness. I put the doll in a passenger seat and went back to the hotel, but everywhere I looked like I felt those glass eyes watching me. I saw myself checking the bag, as if she could move. Ridiculous, I know. But as much as I tried, the discomfort was not passing. I arrived at the room and put the doll over a chair near the window. I tried to forget and follow life. I had dinner, watched TV, but every time I looked to the side, she was there, sitting, immovable. But there was something about her that didn't let me relax. As if I expected something. At night, I woke up a few times. Not for noise, but for a nuisance. That feeling that there is someone standing next to your bed, looking at you. I knew it was silly, but I turned my head slowly. The chair was still there, and the doll too, in the same position. Even so, I was looking at it a while, trying to find some different detail, something that proved that I was just tired, until suddenly I had the impression that her head was a little too tilted, as if, lightly, he was watching me. I closed my eyes and forced myself to sleep, but at that moment, for the first time, I felt maybe I had taken something more than just a doll of that store. And today, when I remember that, I wonder, was she already waiting for me? Or was I who called her without realizing it? It was just coincidence. It could only be. That's what I repeated to myself. But the truth is that that first sign, however little it was, left a discomfort spark inside me. I'm not the kind that is impressive easy. I was always skeptical, practical, of those who think everything has a simple explanation. But that morning, seeing the doll lying on the floor of the living room, turning face down on the wooden floor, I felt something I didn't want to admit. The strange discomfort, as if that scene, for some reason, was not part of what I would call normality. I took the doll slowly. The porcelain was even colder than I remembered. My fingers slid down the faded blue dress, and I noticed something I had not noticed before, a slight dark spot on the fabric bar. It seemed moist, but at the touch it was dry. Perhaps old dirt, I thought. Maybe it wasn't there before. Or maybe I was, and I just hadn't noticed. I must have left badly. I muttered to myself, try to break the uncomfortable silence of the empty room. I put the doll back on the shelf between two large books and pushed lightly, making sure it wouldn't fall again. I took 2 steps back, stood for a few seconds watching, as if waiting for her to move. Ridiculous. I smiled embarrassed, but that smile didn't convince me. That day passed without incidents, but the feeling that something was dislocated did not leave me. I struggled to ignore. I was busy with worldly tasks. I washed clothes, went to the market, watched television. Only from time to time I looked at the shelf and the doll was there. Always there. But there were times when I had the impression that his eyes were different, as if the angle of the gaze had changed a little. It was a thing in my head, of course. Light entering the window in another way, reflex. I wasn't going to be carried away by nonsense. On the second night, I slept badly. I woke up at dawn feeling a suffocating heat, although the window was open. The house was in complete silence, except for a very low, almost imperceptible sound. Tap, 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 as if something was beating gently on the floor. I held my breath. The sound came from the room. I got up slowly, trying to convince my heart to beat slower, but every step I took to the hall seemed to amplify the sound in my head. When I reached the door of the room, the noise stopped. A dense silence has taken over the environment, the kind of silence you feel in the bones. I stretched my hand to the switch and lit the light. The first thing I saw was the doll, on the floor, facing the door. I stood there for long seconds. There was no sign that she had fallen. She was in a position that made no sense to a fall. It was as if someone had put her there, sitting, his face turned where I was. I lowered myself slowly and took the doll. I felt a shiver up the back. The dress looked a little dirtier, and for a moment I had the impression that that dark spot on the bar had grown. I held firmly and put her back on the shelf, this time almost pushing between the books, as if he wanted to arrest her there. "This is getting ridiculous," I said aloud, trying to sound angry, but the truth is that my voice came out shaken. I went back to the room, but couldn't sleep. I wondered that if I got up again, the doll would be elsewhere. Each little snap of the house made me open my eyes and face the dark. The next morning, something made me hesitate before going to the living room. I took a deep breath and followed. The doll was on the shelf, exactly where I had left. I sighed relieved and laughed alone. "I'm getting paranoid," I whispered. Maybe it was really. Maybe it was just because I was stressed, or because that store story and the owner's way had planted a silly idea in my head. It could only be that. But as I passed the kitchen, I noticed something else. The balcony door was ajar. I was absolutely sure that I had locked it the night before. Always lock. That kind of thing pisses me off. Still, she was there, open enough for the morning wind to make the curtain swing lightly. I stood, looking at the curtain moving gently, as if something had just passed by. Or maybe it was still there. I felt a tightness in the stomach's mouth. I locked the door tightly and went back to the living room. I looked at the doll again. For some reason, she seemed pleased. I can't explain, but that feeling accompanied me all day, as if I was sharing the house with something invisible, something that watched me as I pretended that everything was fine. I remember the old man of the store and his strange smile. I remembered his words. "No one has been around for a long time. Why no one wanted? What didn't he tell me?" These questions started to follow me around the house like shadows. And the more I tried to ignore, the more I looked like I listened to that sound again. Tap, tap, tap. At night, I closed all doors and windows, checked the cracks twice. Still, I went to sleep with the feeling that at some point in the morning I would listen again. Tap, tap, tap. Something was not right, but I still tried to find logical explanations. I was always like this. Practical, realistic. These supernatural things have never been to me. But in that house, the days followed, there was something that fled from my control, and that made me restless. I tried to ignore, but every time I passed the room and saw the doll on the shelf, I felt that nuisance growing up. It all started in a subtle way. Doors that I was absolutely sure of having closed were open in the morning. At first, I thought it was my distraction. Maybe I had forgotten. Who never? But when it happened for the third time, with the bathroom door, the one that stuck and always needed strength to close, I knew it was not careless. Still, I forced myself to believe it was. I needed to believe it. On Monday, I came back from the exhausted work. I grabbed a beer in the fridge and threw myself on the couch. I turned on the TV, but she blinked strange, as if it was short. Then it went out alone. I snorted annoyed. I took the control, tried again. It worked for a few minutes, until it erases again. Only this time, she came back alone. And the channel was different. A Chieda static screen, that low noise that seems to fill every corner of the room. I felt a shiver. I changed fast and tried to laugh at the situation, but the metal sound of the Chiado was echoing in my head. I looked at the doll, and I swear for a second only, I was sure that her head was slightly turned to me. "This is my head," I muttered, but the voice came out so low that I didn't even believe it myself. On Wednesday, in the morning, when I went down to get coffee, I smelled a different smell. It was not from the kitchen. Something humid, almost like rotten wood, mixed with a sweet but aged perfume. I looked around. Nothing looked out of place, but the smell was there, impregnated. And once again, when I looked at the shelf, I felt that tightness in my chest. The doll's painted eyes looked slightly brighter, as if there were moisture in them. At night, while watching a movie, something moved by the corner of his eye. Fast, a subtle shadow, or maybe a reflection, I don't know. My body reacted before my mind. I looked straight to the shelf, and what I saw made me freeze for a few seconds. The doll was there, as always, but its expression seemed wrong. The mouth slightly more open. The eyes, once fixed, seemed now focused on me. Not only painted, I swear I felt she was seeing. Not seeing how an object is observed. Seeing as if studied me. I turned off the TV and stood, staring. My chest climbed and descended fast. I could hear my own breath. Then I closed my eyes. I took a deep breath. I knew it was suggested. Since the day I bought that damn doll, I was letting my mind create things. I decided to go to sleep. I got up, and when I passed the hall, I felt the cold. Not a common cold of those that the wind brings. It was something more personal, as if something was there beside me and below slightly against my neck. My skin shivered entirely. I locked in the middle of the step. I didn't look back. I didn't have the courage. I just followed fast to the room. I locked the door. Lying on the bed, I tried to forget. I tried to repeat that it was just stress, tiredness. But every time I closed my eyes, I felt that I had someone stopped across the door. Or worse, maybe it wasn't outside. Maybe I was there with me. I couldn't say. I just knew that feeling wasn't leaving. The next day, I wanted to take the doll out of the room, put in a box, stick in some corner. But when I woke up and went to the shelf, she looked normal, intact, even beautiful, if I didn't know what I knew. For a moment, I felt silly, exaggerated. But when I took the doll to keep, I felt something strange. The dress was a little damp, and the smell I felt in the kitchen. It was in it. My stomach rolled. I held firmly, but the sweat was already dripping at the back of my neck. I looked at the window, tried to focus on something else, and saw something that froze me inside. The condensation marks on the glass were not random. They looked fingers, as if someone had stayed there, inside, leaning against the street for a long time. And at the bottom, almost imperceptible, there was something written in the steam layer. Treed letters, as if the hand he wrote were trembling. The word was short. Just out. I dropped the doll. She fell on the carpet and stood there aside. I looked at her, hoping something would happen. It didn't happen. Just the silence. I knelt and got it again. My hands trembled. I put it back on the shelf. And before leaving the room, I looked for the last time. Her expression remained the same, or almost. For a moment, I had the impression that she was smiling. It was at this moment that I realized that was not imagination. I woke up startled, the heart fired even before I understood why. A dry noise echoed around the house. Something had fallen or was knocked down. I was still for a few seconds, trying to hear something else. The silence was so dense that it seemed to be pulsed. I looked at the cell phone on the bedside table, 3H12. I sighed deeply and slid my feet slowly out of bed. The floor was cold, but not so cold as the air that seemed to wrap the room. That feeling came back, the same one that accompanied me for days. I was not alone there. I took the phone and lit the flashlight. The light was lightly fluttered because of my sweaty hands. I left the room, stepping light. Every creak of the wood under my feet sounded like a shot. The corridor looked longer. I passed the door of the room and saw books that were previously organized on the shelf were spread across the floor as if they were swept down by a brute force. But what made my stomach turn was realizing that the doll, it wasn't there. The bookcase was empty, the space where she used to look like a hole in reality. My breath was short, every heartbeat vibrated in my ears. I looked around, trying to find some sign of falling, some indicative that she had only rolled under the couch or fallen behind the books. Nothing. Only then I heard steps, light dragged but close. Right behind me, my body crashed. My fingers squeezed the cell phone so much that I thought it would break. The flashlight just illuminated the floor in front of me, but the sound, it was behind. I knew, I felt, each hair of my body has erected. The air got heavier. My instinct screamed, so I didn't look. Do not turn. Do not turn. Do not turn. But I turned. Slowly, the light of the cell phone shook in my hand, creating long shadows that moved the walls. There was no one, but on the floor by the living room door she was. The doll, sitting, perfectly positioned, with your legs stretched and your hands on her lap. The fixed eyes on me. I felt a knot in my stomach as if swallowed stones. I took a step back, trying to convince myself that I had left her there and forgotten. Only not. I knew no, and what made me more scared was not just her position. It was the floor around, wet, small dark spots such as footprints of something that seemed to have walked barefoot from the door to the center of the room. The smell was there too, that sweet, putrid odor, which reminded me at the same time withered flowers and spoiled meat. My chest squeezed. I wanted to run, but I couldn't move. So I heard something else. A whisper, low, almost like a weak breathing, very close to my ear. You saw. My skin froze, and the cell phone slipped from my hand, hitting the floor with a snap that seemed to break the silence. The lantern light turned, illuminating the ceiling for a moment, and it was in this brief second that I saw, or I thought I saw it, a silhouette, small, curved, stopped in the corner near the window. It was too low to be an adult, and the contours were vague, as if they were mingling with the darkness. I closed my eyes, just for a moment. When I opened it, nothing else was there, not even a shadow, just the doll, and that smell. I need to get out of there. The feeling of being observed has become something else. It was as if it were around me, touching my skin without me being able to see. I took the phone from the floor. My hands trembled so much that I could hardly push the button on the screen. I ran to the room, locking the door behind me. I leaned against the wall, trying to hear if something moved in the room. I didn't hear anything, but I knew it was still there. I don't know what. I don't know who. I thought about calling someone, but what would I say? That a doll was walking around the house. I was listening to voices. It would laugh at my face. I would laugh myself a few days ago. But now I knew. That was no longer coincidence. It was not a paranoia. I wasn't imagining. Something was there, with me. I ran out. I never wanted to go back to that house at night. After that last incident, with the footsteps and the doll sitting by the door, I just couldn't ignore it anymore. There was something there, something I didn't understand, something that was not human. When the son was born, I took courage, went to the living room, and took it. The porcelain was cold as ice, and the sweet and rotten smell still pervaded the faded blue dress. I put the doll in a cardboard box, closed with tape, and threw it at the bottom of the closet, behind blankets and things I didn't even wear. I spent the day out, tried to follow my routine, but every time I thought about it, my stomach racked it. When I came back, at night, Something hit me even before lighting the light. The smell. That smell. I went slowly, and my gaze went straight to the shelf. She was there, in the same position as always, as if it had never left. The box and closet? Empty. My body got hot and cold at the same time. It was no longer fear. It was the absolute certainty that I was not alone in that house. I didn't want to believe it, but I had no choice anymore. To this day, I don't know if it was real or if my mind crumbled for good. I just know that even though I changed me, sometimes I wake up in the middle of the night and I swear I smell that smell. Have you ever been through something like this? And this was one of our followers' stories. If you want your story to be told by us as well, leave it in the comments below this video. And if you enjoyed this video and want to see more content like this, we prepared the next video especially for you. Click here to watch it,